are you?
All right.
Good, and you? I'm good.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. So thanks so much for joining us this morning. My name is Lauren Noble, and I'm the founder and executive director of the William F. Buckley Jr. program at Yale. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to the final of 3 events we've been holding during the Yale Alumni Reunion Weekends. Before I introduce our speakers for this morning, I want to say a few brief words about the Buckley program. The William F. Buckley Jr. program is an organization dedicated to promoting intellectual diversity at Yale. Throughout the year, we host lectures, seminars, firing line debates, conferences, and much more. Our over 500 Buckley Fellows have a wide range of political beliefs, but they all stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber, especially at a university where the mission is the cultivation and creation of new knowledge. Buckley Fellows believe that all perspectives must be heard and examined in good faith. You can learn more about the program on our website, buckleyprogram.com. Now, it's no secret that in recent years, viewpoint diversity and freedom of speech have been major concerns on college campuses across the country and at Yale in particular. Our newest initiative, Fight for Yale's Future, has recently launched a petition calling on Yale to reaffirm its commitment to the free speech principles of the Woodward Report. As many of you know, the Woodward Report celebrates the right to think the unthinkable, discuss the unmentionable, and challenge the unchallengeable. We already have over 800 signatures from students, faculty, and alumni. So if you haven't already done so, I hope you'll sign the petition and spread the word. Our past 2 events have featured leaders of national organizations addressing these subjects of viewpoint diversity and freedom of speech on campus. And now today, we're focusing on Yale specifically, and we'll get some perspective on these issues at Yale from a faculty member and a current student. And so now I'm excited to introduce our 2 guests. Carlos Eire is the T.L. Riggs Professor of History and Religious Studies at Yale University, where he has served as chair of the Department of Religious Studies and the Renaissance Studies program. He has taught at St. John's University in Minnesota and the University of Virginia, and has been a member and fellow of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. He is the author of War Against the Idols, From Madrid to Purgatory, A Very Brief History of Eternity, and Reformations, the Early Modern World, which won the Hawkins Award from the Association of American Publishers. A past president of the American Society for Reformation Research, he is best known outside of scholarly circles as the author of the memoir Waiting for Snow in Havana, which won the Nonfiction National Book Award in the United States, and his second memoir, Learning to Die in Miami. All of his books are banned in Cuba, where where he has been proclaimed an enemy of the state, a distinction he regards as the highest of all honors. Kevin Xiao is a rising senior at Yale from just outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He studies political science with a focus on the administrative presidency. Kevin is the student president of the Buckley program and has served as part of our student leadership team since his 2nd semester on campus. Kevin has interned for the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, the Alexander Hamilton Society, and the Federal Election Commission. So our panelists will begin with some remarks, and then we look forward to hearing your questions. So please join me in giving them both a warm welcome.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lauren, and thank you all for being here. And we would like for this to be more question and answer than lecture. So I'll keep my comments brief, but I'll try to front load them with the issues that I think are on everyone's mind. And I think let me start with good news. I think what happened at the Yale Law School this spring, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, the students interrupting, trying to basically stop someone from speaking or being heard. From my perspective, that is not reflective of what the administration has in mind or the faculty, and I think many students, at least the students I know, would not approve of this kind of behavior. So there's still plenty of room for expressing different opinions. The question becomes, as William F. Buckley loved to say, the question becomes, what price is there to pay if you do dare to speak the unspeakable? And what I'd like to focus on, I think freedom of expression is not under any direct threat here, now, but it might be in the future. And that was what worries me the most, because of the way in which faculty are hired. And there's a way of sneaking in the echo chamber. And it's happening, and it's not just happening here, it's happening at just about every institution of higher learning, elite or not. And what is happening is, especially in the humanities, I don't know the sciences, and I'm sure there it's much harder to do this kind of overloading one perspective. But especially in the humanities, and I suspect also the social sciences, which I don't know how that works exactly, but in the humanities especially, the jobs being advertised, right, the jobs being created, and the description of these jobs is controlled by each department. But what I've seen happening here, certainly, and elsewhere, is that the jobs being created the descriptions are crafted in such a way as to exclude people who are not woke. And I call it the unholy trinity. The unholy trinity in the humanities and social sciences: race, class, and gender. Race, class, gender. Race, class, gender. It's been going on for quite some time. But when you read these job descriptions, sometimes, if you're of a certain age and you have a long memory, your brain can explode. Such as a job advertised at the University of Chicago 2 years ago. Renaissance literature. Oh, how wonderful, because I'll have more to say about that. A Renaissance literature job at the University of Chicago, how wonderful. But it was for Renaissance and race. Race, yes, Renaissance and race. Race and racism are being invented in the past. Now, you have to look back at the past through this lens, also the lens of gender and class. So this kind of quasi or actually overt Marxism is being built into the job descriptions, and these are the new faculty being hired. Now, here at Yale, last year was a record year for retirements in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. 70 faculty retired last year. And more positions were created than were vacated. And you can guess how those job descriptions have been worded, or how the selection process works when people come to actually interview for the job. And I'll give you an example from my own field of what's happening, because it's not just Yale. But for the past 3 years, Chicago is not alone either. Race, class, gender being injected into all the job descriptions that I have read for openings in my field. My field is dying. Early modern European history. Every American university of note used to have a Reformation historian and a Renaissance historian. Those two terms do not exist anymore. They do not appear in job openings, right? Reformation studies is dying. I have 8 PhD students with a PhD from Yale who have yet to land a tenure track job. Because in the past year, as an example, there were only 3 jobs in all of North America in early modern European history. And forget religious history, okay? Renaissance, Reformation are both going away. We just renamed our Renaissance Studies program here. It's now Early Modern Studies. Renaissance doesn't exist. Reformation doesn't exist. History pre-18th or 19th century is also kind of withering on the vine. And departments are filling up with, it's not just the race, class, gender issue, it's presentism, where the past is looked at strictly through the lenses of the present. How can we inject our present day concerns into the writing of history and the teaching of history? And that is a very serious problem that, George Orwell put it very, very nicely in 1984. Forget which character says this. That he who controls the past controls the present and also the future. If you control the past and rewrite the past, something like this 1619 project, the New York Times, there's no better way to actually gut a culture and get rid of what is the essence of any culture, is to rewrite its history. So that's what we face. And my last remark is about the price to pay. There's still freedom of speech, right? But if you're outnumbered, your faculty, and you're outnumbered when these job descriptions are being crafted or people are being hired, there's nothing you can do as an individual, as a lone voice. You'll be allowed to speak, but very softly, or maybe in another room. And I'll close with this because it brings us to the present moment. And it's germane to what I just said about the way in which jobs are crafted and faculty are replaced. We lost 3 early modern historians 4 years ago. One retired, one went back to University of Chicago where he had come from, and the other got a permanent position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, which is like going to heaven, because all you do is your own work. You don't have to teach. We lost 3. It's taken 4 years for the administration to grant the history department a job to advertise. 1 job. 3 retirees and exiles, and I guess if you go to the Institute for Advanced Study, you can be among the dearly departed. But anyway, at a junior level. So for the first time, probably since its founding, Yale does not have a historian of early modern England, Elizabethan England, and probably will not have one. There were 4 of us in the history department who had to fight tooth and claw to include Britain in parentheses in the job description. Early modern European history, parentheses, including Britain. So the search was approved for next year, junior position in early modern history. I find out in an email that I'm not on the search committee, and I am the senior early modernist in the history department. They don't want me on the committee. Not even, not chair, just not on the committee. And neither is the other senior early modern historian, Bruce Gordon. Only one person out of 4 in the search committee is an early modern historian. But everyone knows what my views are. So that's the price to pay. I was told that I wasn't included in the committee because I already have, quote unquote, too much on my plate. So, okay, fine. I've lived in a totalitarian society. I know what it feels like, and I know what it looks like. And well, this is so much of a deja vu for me to have something like this happen. But what can be done about this? It's a large problem, and it requires a lot of thinking and planning. And this is a long-term thing. We're now dealing with something that's kind of akin to what the Catholic Church has been doing for 2,000 years, which is thinking in terms of generations and centuries, rather than days, weeks, months, or years. But if this trend continues, all the faculty in the humanities throughout the entire United States is going to be members of an echo chamber. And that's what scares me the most. I'll leave it at that.
Kevin?
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today, and I gotta say it's probably the hardest task that I've encountered in the past few months to follow up Professor Eire's remarks. And if this is the room that we're speaking at, the other room per se, I think there are worse, but I'm gonna try to bring some perspective on what students are facing and what is kind of motivating the kind of breakdown in free speech, and present a few hypotheses for what's causing it, enabling it in these past few years at Yale. I'm also going to try to keep my remarks brief, because I think your questions are probably more interesting than anything I have to say. But so first, what is going on at Yale? I think it's no surprise to students of this university, students across America, that more than half of students don't feel free to speak what they really believe in the classroom or outside the classroom. My former employer and newly renamed Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression has found that, and the Buckley program surveys have found that. But I think what is new in these past few years is this idea that certain perspectives can be unsafe, make people feel endangered, and this idea that teaching certain topics can be, as Professor Eire said, racist, classist, sexist. Terms that I hear regularly in my political science classes, that certain ideas should not be espoused normatively, even just for academic study, because they endanger marginalized groups in society. And that's not to say that these ideas aren't wrong or are wrong, or lack credence, but they are stifling in a way that I haven't seen other perspectives in the classroom be. And I'll give an example of this. So when my friend was speaking out in Political Science 150, which is a class with Professor Shapiro, Moral Foundations of Politics, when he spoke out in section, he found that his views were not challenged in the classroom, but outside on social media, on messaging platforms, an anonymous messaging platform, and he was publicly doxxed for this. And other students see these examples of public condemnation for their remarks, of students not being able to say what they want to say without having fear of reproach from the entire student body, much less the people in their class. And other students taking this debate not from the classroom, not within the classroom, not challenging it openly, but behind their backs. And I think this is a symptom that we've seen across the university and has been enabled by students thinking that this is just the way that we should go about these battles, that we shouldn't fight them at the dinner table. We shouldn't discuss them at the dinner table. We shouldn't discuss them in the classroom. We shouldn't discuss them in a face-to-face setting, but rather escalate them to the courtroom of social media or the administration or outside venues where there's really no place for the accused to defend themselves. And I think this has had two perverse consequences. First, that students who do see this, who want to be liked, want to have friends at Yale College, feel like they can't speak out, and they choose not to speak out. They voluntarily silence. And I agree, the free expression is not under attack at Yale per se. I don't think that any student feels that they can't speak without having the administration rebuke them and expel them. But I think that students are afraid to speak out because they know that whatever they say will be held against them, not just today, tomorrow, but 5 years from now, as things are put on social media and put on for the world to see forever. That's the first perverse consequence. And the second perverse consequence is that it tells students who have been sort of ostracized for what they have said to go out and keep doing it, to continue spreading whatever thing they've said and just hammer in and ground themselves in these opinions, because they know I have no friends on this side of the campus. I have no leftist friends, so why not be even more extreme? And this has created a really polarizing campus climate where everyone is striving to be the most something, the most social justice warrior, the most in favor of canceling this unpopular opinion or this non-PC opinion. And it's made it so that friends that I once considered dear and close and I could say anything to see everything as a political stunt, as something I say to them as ammunition to be used against me or others in a future forum, as bullets to pierce the armor of free speech in the future. And pardon my terrible metaphors, but I think that this sort of dynamic is at play across the university because the university wants that. The university doesn't have a reason to stand up for courageous opinions and moral courage. The university sees this condemnation as maintaining their image in the public media, allowing them to have professors like Amy Chua be canceled on Twitter. And they say, this is not our battle. And this is what the students are doing. This is between the students and the faculty. And we won't back these faculty. We won't back these students when they come under fire. And this all sends a message, I think, to students as well, where students see that the university is not here to protect them. The university is not here to create spaces for dialogue. The university is really just here for its own self-preservation, where everything that happens in the university is meant to protect its image, where if something could harm Yale's image as this elite, educated, aristocratic even institution where students come from all backgrounds and can be educated in the right way of thinking. That's what the university wants to perpetuate with its image. And when we see this with the student body, we see that students don't feel that saying what they honestly believe is in their own interest. Faculty who speak out see that the university not only doesn't back them, but condemns their statements, as we saw in the fall. And this sort of culture will always feed into itself because there's no backbone behind the university. And I think that as long as we allow administrators to tell students that these sorts of statements are okay, that attacking your peers ad hominem, as opposed to on the merits of their arguments, calling them racists and classists and sexists is okay, we'll always see this fear of speaking out. And for that reason, I came to the university to speak honestly and have my opinions corrected if they were wrong and hear the opposing argument. But now students aren't exposed to the opposing argument. They seek out the echo chambers that they feel comfortable in and are validated in. And the university is here to do that, to continuously validate students so that when they graduate and they go into lucrative fields, they'll continue giving back to the university. And I'm not here to say that that dynamic is wrong, but I'm here to say that that dynamic has made it so that when the students came to the university to learn, they are quickly told that that is not actually the purpose of the university. The purpose of this university is to give you a degree, and then you can go out in the world and make money and give back to the university. And for me, that has been a troubling consequence of the sort of moral atmosphere that the university has created for the students. And as long as we allow that to occur, as long as we allow the administration to not stand up for anything, not stand up for the values of free speech, or not stand up for interesting opinions, diverse opinions, then we'll see this gradual disintegration of the intellectual fibers of the university. And I think we've seen that for the past 10 years. So I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful. Well, thanks to both of our speakers for those compelling and insightful remarks. We're going to have some time for questions now. Isabel, if you have a question, please raise your hand, and Isabel will come around with a mic. I'll start with one quick one of my own while Isabel finds her way to people with their hands up. Professor Eire, five years ago, you and other professors at Princeton, Harvard, and Yale signed an open letter offering students the following advice: think for yourself. The letter explained that thinking for yourself means questioning dominant ideas even when others insist on their being treated as unquestionable. It means deciding what one believes not by conforming to fashionable opinions, but by taking the trouble to learn and honestly consider the strongest arguments to be advanced on both or all sides of questions. Now, to some, the suggestion to think for oneself may seem obvious, especially at a university, but this advice certainly seems as urgent, today as it was 5 years ago. And so, I'm wondering, how do you think, students are doing in that regard? If you had to, add to that advice today, what would you add? And Kevin, feel free to weigh in on kind of what advice you would give to your peers.
Well, I would still give the same advice, but now after hearing what Kevin had to say, see, this is as a dinosaur. The social media thing is an unknown dimension for me. So again, like I said, but what price is there to pay for speaking the unspeakable, or even daring to raise a topic that is not on the approved list? There, as I've just heard, and you've all just heard, there's a price to be paid in the world outside of the university. So I think that's still, that statement of, I can't believe it was 5 years ago. But it's still, I think it's more germane now than it was 5 years ago.
So my honest advice or my idealistic advice?
Both. You could do both.
I'll start with my honest advice. I'll say that at Yale and the student body, there are certain opinions that can be heterodox, but fashionable, but okay to hold. And I'd say that those are the economic fiscal policy issues. You can say, I'm in favor of less regulation. I'm in favor of cutting taxes. I'm in favor of a smaller government generally. Those are opinions that you can hold without too much fear of reproach, I'd say. But the moment you start talking about the recent Dobbs case, you start talking about the death penalty. You talk about guns. Your reputation is over. So I'd say, if my honest advice to a student at Yale who is trying to still make friends, meet new people, but hold true to their beliefs, is stick to the safe opinions. And if you find a group of people that you're close to, that you can speak honestly with, 2, 3, 4, no more than that, I'd recommend. That's the safe space that I would, not safe space per se, but that's the space that I would leave those opinions and speak honestly in. My idealistic advice is, I wish that students would stand up for their friends when they see that they're being criticized unfairly. Even if I don't agree with someone, I still think that we shouldn't judge them for the person they are, but for what they say, and argue with them on the merits of that. And I said, as long as I hope students can hold true to that, I've grown increasingly pessimistic during my time at Yale, but I think that there are still some students, some younger students, freshmen, sophomores, who understand that there is a sort of right and wrong in what is fair and unfair criticism. And that criticism doesn't come through social media, it doesn't come online, it comes in person. And I've had many honest conversations with people just over the dinner table and over the coffee where we can really relate. But not speaking these opinions, not putting them online for the world to see and the world to judge, more importantly, has been something that I would steer clear from with a wide berth.
Question?
Yes, I'm up here. Can you guys hear me? Okay. First of all, Kevin, kudos to you. You are the first young person under age 30, including many very talented doctors I've had the pleasure of teaching in recent years who have not used the word like in 20 minutes of speaking. But anyway, yeah, so I'm here for my 50+1 class reunion with my friend Mitch Garner. And and we're also going up to the crew races this afternoon. And go Yale, let's sweep Harvard. I reiterate everything that you and the professor said. A little anecdote. As I was waiting in a parking lot to pick up Mitch yesterday, coming in from Ann Arbor and picking up with Bradley, I had called a classmate who also became a doctor. He's actually a twin. Both he and his twin brother did undergrad at Yale and then became doctors at Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons. I consider them both very conservative. I had called Alan from my car while I was waiting for Mitch's plane to land, and I left him a voicemail while we were riding down to Woodbridge, where we were staying with another friend. He called me back, and we were just chatting, and asked me what I was doing, and among other things, I said, well, I've bought a second home in Florida, and I'm working for Ron DeSantis. And I think only half tongue-in-cheek, he said, quote, I think I'm going to have to hang up on you now. That sentiment prevailed about 9 times in a row as we convened for breakfast at Davenport College and so forth and so on. Every time in the course of conversation that came up, it was the same thing. Why? How come? Really? And my response was, how do you like life under Biden? You know, but the thread that I found, and you know, I'll bare my soul here, the thread that I found in the animosity that I engendered was the fact that people assumed that I was a fan of Donald Trump, which I am not. I think he did some good things. I'm not going to badmouth him here, but frankly, I do think he's ill-suited for the job. That is Donald Trump. So I'm on the DeSantis bandwagon. I'd like to see somebody like Kristi Noem, or that is a woman, or a black senator from South Carolina, Tim Scott, on the bottom of the ticket, and I think that'd be unbeatable. So, but in terms of the climate here, after about the 9th person that I spoke to yesterday that had the same sort of response, that looked at me like I was a leper. You know, I had a real sense of sadness, and it's too bad because I loved this place when I was here. Right now, I'm not so sure. There you go.
Thank you. Kevin, I also have gray hair, and I'm a dinosaur Neanderthal when it comes to social media, but I'm really very really marked by your comments about what the life on campus is in social media right now. So could you elaborate a little more, you know, for a typical undergraduate, how much of their life, you know, I read stories about people outside of a university who are doxxed, or, you know, there's a Twitter fire when they've said something and their friends turn against them. But in Yale undergraduate, how much of life is lived, or can you ignore what's being said in social media?
you can delete the apps. Maybe that's another piece of advice I give. For those who aren't willing to take that step, I'll give an example that was just this past May. So one of my close friends posted on Instagram, she's very religious, she posted on Instagram that she's going on a mission trip. And she asked for support to go to the Middle East and spread her religion. I am not totally clear on what the specifics were. And she asked for just a few donations from her friends on Instagram. And the first comment was, "Why are you supporting neocolonialism?" And then 3 more paragraphs later, "Don't you see what you're doing is wrong?" And that post, that comment itself engendered over 150 likes from people who weren't willing to say to her face, my friend's face, the person who posted this, "Hey, maybe we should have a conversation about your motives or what it is that you're doing, or just talk about things." And not this was only drawn to my attention because my girlfriend said to me, "Hey, have you seen this post involving so-and-so? Because it's really blowing up." And I heard this 5 more times in the next course of the day. And I would consider myself religious, but not extremely. But I just saw this post and I was saying, maybe we should meet her in good faith. Maybe we should talk to her about what she's trying to do and just have a conversation. And it seems to me that social media doesn't allow us to do that. And students, when they post on social media, when they say anything, when they know that they could be put on someone's Snapchat, they just shut down. They immediately assume the worst. They put their guard up. And I think that there's no way to avoid it because everyone's in this sort of mode where I could be attacked at any moment. Who's safe to share my real feelings with? Or how can I platform myself to criticize that other person and be the most social justice warrior or the most politically correct in this respect? So to answer your question, I don't think there's any way for students to avoid the constant glare of social media because everything you say could be put there, and everything you do could become a video on someone's Snapchat story or a post attacking them on an anonymous messaging forum. And there's no way to avoid it. And students see that, they see that there's no safe place for them, and they just shut down. So that's what I'd say is the pervasive influence of social media.
So something I've heard even this weekend a couple of times that this is a pendulum, all pendulums swing back, and they'll look at a certain tea leaf or two to suggest maybe the pendulum is swinging back on woke culture in general. So my question is very simple. Sometimes a pendulum can be a wrecking ball. So where Yale's concerned, is this a pendulum? If you had to pick, is this a pendulum or a wrecking ball? Can the Long March declare its victory at this point? Because it kind of seems that way to me.
Do you want to take that, Professor?
Sure. No, I think there is truth behind that old saying about the pendulum swinging back and forth. But you're right about the wrecking ball in terms of long-term change. If the pendulum swings in the way in which I described in loading up the faculty who are only interested in certain perspectives, that's not a pendulum swing. That's more than that. It's a wrecking ball. But the pendulum has been swinging in the United States ever since the nation was founded. And I remember, I was in college in the late 60s, early 70s. That was called a pendulum swing too. But that's another time period where faculties were being loaded up with a certain ideological frame of mind. And it's in the 60s and 70s especially that faculties in the humanities throughout the United States and Canada, became overwhelmingly liberal. So that's the wrecking ball effect.
That was excellent, thank you. I'm here for a reunion too. I'm a former academic surgeon at a top institution in America, and I've been practicing for a long time. But all of a sudden, and I teach, and I'm religious, and I fear God. But all of a sudden, over the last couple of years, I became a white supremacist. Can you ask me how I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden I am. Can you explain how that happens?
Well, I think it's simple. You're a white male. I think that qualifies you by today's standards. But in all seriousness, that's a serious accusation that is lodged regularly at departments at Yale. There are entire departments where you just don't have a valid opinion if you are white and male. And luckily, I am not white and male, I'm Asian and male. So I've gotten away a little bit with this, but I have friends that go into a class and they don't dare speak, because if they speak, no one will listen first. And then if anyone no one wants to hear what they have to say, they say, your perspective is not valid because you do not have the same lived experience as I do. That's the end of it. There's no back and forth. You can't argue with that because you can't change the color of your skin, and you can't change your. I'll take that. We'll see about the second one. But all these things, what I thought were immutable characteristics that we shouldn't be judged for, we shouldn't be judged for the color of our skin, have now become weapons to be used against you, and.
Yes.
That's my thinking on a lot of this, and I hear calls for people to include Asians in this sort of oppressive community, and I'm just wondering, what is the next one? If you have certain viewpoints, you're put in this dangerous group, and then your opinion does not matter forever and ever.
Yeah, there's no better way to cut off discussion, or actually prevent discussion, than to pigeonhole people into some evil category. And I'm constantly reminded of the way in which good Augustinians in the Christian tradition believe in an original sin, and especially the Puritans, that you're just damaged. You're damaged goods. Well, now that's being applied, in a different way, but the same way, to shut off any kind of discussion and prevent people from speaking or having an opinion. When I do public speaking on Cuba and what happened there, quite often because again, I'm a white supremacist, and I don't look Cuban. First question I get is, how much property did your family own? Because that cuts off everything I have said. I'm privileged. That's the other thing. You're privileged. So it doesn't matter what color your skin is. You're privileged. Then nothing you have to say is worth hearing.
Hi, Dave Anderson, class of 71, like many people here, actually. 2 questions. Number one, this long march that's gotten started perhaps in the 60s, but certainly accelerated now, toward changing the faculty. All of that seems like a real problem with leadership of academic departments. I had a conversation with a Princeton historian about his chair of history, and he agreed that the chairs in these positions are not taking responsible, balanced positions, nor are the presidents of the universities requiring chairs to take these balance. So on the one hand, seems to me it's a leadership problem, and which means it's a governance problem, because governors should be requiring their leaders to do these things. And on the other hand, we have this mass of, I'll call them the silent elite, the silent majority, mass of people, many of whom are classmates of ours, who don't have a strong point of view about what we're talking about here, but kind of are collaborators in creating this overall press in one direction. They're quiet about it unless you ask them, but they certainly vote that way, and they certainly talk that way. And they in some ways also constrain, in many ways, constrain the conversations and are enablers of what's happening. So on the one hand, we have a leadership problem. On the other hand, we have this enablement problem. And the question is, what do we do about it?
That's the $64 million question. What do we do about it? Actually, I think the issue that you brought up, it's not just the sort of lack of leadership, but it's a certain kind of leadership that's leaning definitely in a certain direction. We got a message from one of our deans for the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, since we had all these slots open up when 70 faculty retired. The dean said that the people we should hire will be transformative. We should only hire transformative faculty. So it's actually, there is leadership, but it's going in an opposite direction from that of intellectual diversity. I can't imagine that any other kind of meaning for that word transformative. But we're going to make sure we hire people with conservative political views to transform Yale into a conservative institution? I don't think so.
I'll pay to see that day.
Talking of lived experiences, like I've been on this campus for close to 10 years now, and I am Asian, I'm not a white male. I am a student of the Renaissance, and recently it's like the campus has become like a Kafkaesque non-ending horror story for me, and I'll give one example just to like get your opinion about like honestly what I should do, right? I remember vividly, like I was at a meeting at the Yale chaplain's office, which by my opinion is a completely morally bankrupt institution at this point. But I was there, and we were asked to share like what music we like, right? And we were sitting there. Everyone before me was sharing music just to kind of to wear it lightly, that politically like point to a certain direction. And I was sitting there was this table, and I felt the sweat coming down my back. I was like, what am I supposed to share? Because I happened, for all sorts of strange personal reasons, to grow up exclusively listening to music without lyrics, essentially classical music, right? That's the only kind of music I know. That's the only kind of music I've listened to. So I didn't want to get canceled right there on the spot. So I had to come up with something that at least had lyrics, and the only thing I managed to come up with was actually Schubert's Song Cycle, because that was the only thing I know. And ever since then, I've noticed that it has gotten to the point where I am not even allowed to share my aesthetic tastes with people of my age without serious repercussions. And I mean serious, it's like in a casual day-to-day conversation, if someone asked me, what do you read? I said, I love reading Shakespeare. No, you're not allowed to say that. Like 2 marks like off like whatever, social justice. And then, so it's just like when you have that kind of micro management, micro control, micro censorship that's so pervasive in every aspect of your life, how do you even survive? I feel like this campus is like at certain points like a mental torture for me. Like I can't even live here anymore. So it's just like, yeah.
Do you want to address that, Kevin?
That's a hard one. That's a hard one, I gotta say. I think finding a group of people that will accept you for who you are has been maybe cliche advice I've been given, but probably the best advice I've been given at Yale. And my suite mates, I love them. We can argue about anything, and they know at the end of the day that I'm not this horrible individual that's here to terrorize the world or oppress the oppressed peoples for millennia after this. I think finding those people and sticking with them and staying close with them throughout your time is probably the best advice I could give, the best advice I've been given too.
Hi, my name is Margaret Kelly. I live in New Haven. I'm not a Yale alum, but I work for a news website that's focused on higher education and leans to the right. And one hopeful sign that I've seen is that alumni have power and alumni who organize and who want to champion free speech and want to form organizations even to support free speech is something that can move the ledger. There's a group that I'm following called the MIT Free Speech Alliance that comprises MIT alumni and friends of the college. And right now they just received a $500,000 donation from a free speech group. And they're using that in part to plan a debate at MIT this fall on the merits of DEI versus an alternate framework proposed by Dorian Abbott, who was a professor who was canceled at MIT. He proposed a framework of evaluating based on merit and I forget the acronym, but evaluating based on merit in hiring and promoting. So they're actually going to stage a debate hopefully between proponents of DEI and proponents of merit and fairness in hiring and promotion. So for that to happen at MIT, in the main auditorium is a big deal. And that's happening because of alumni who got together and said that there's a hostile climate for free speech at MIT and we want to do something about it. So that's one sign of optimism, I think. But I had a question for the professor, I think, and also for Kevin, but I'm wondering, what do you think is lost in the abandonment of the academic study of religion and theology understood on its own terms, not terms of like sexism in Buddhism or race and Christianity, the study of religion historically and sympathetically and with a desire to understand and learn from it. What do you think is lost in the abandonment of that in an increasingly secular society?
Well,
And that's a big question.
yeah. I'm going down the list, which items should go first, but obviously, religion is a very real human dimension. Our species might also have been called Homo religiosus, as well as Homo sapiens, right? So you're ignoring a huge part of the human experience. But within the study of religion, the academic study of religion, what gets lost in religious studies departments nowadays, and I'm not talking about divinity schools or seminaries, I'm talking about religious studies departments, is the presentist perspective, where even if you're studying the tradition in the past, you're trying to get to you're doing, let's say, history of theology, it has a way of being turned around, become presentist. And that is especially true if you're dealing with Judeo-Christian religion. You're dealing with other religions, Islam or Asian religions, then it's a little different because it's mostly anthropological perspective that gets taken on these religions. But when it comes to the traditions, the Judeo-Christian tradition, what is thrown out the window with this way of crafting job openings and creating a departmental culture is that the dominant perspective is presentism. So that you can end up with a dissertation on the Trinity, for instance, as a model for gay relationships. We had one such dissertation. So, and that's what happens. The tradition itself is a way off in the rearview mirror.
It's how you import modern values into old texts.
Yeah, right.
Which is a distortion. It's a dignity. Like
One would say so. My current project is a book on impossible miracles, levitation and bilocation. I call it a history of the impossible. Audience members, when I've given talks on this, as well, wanted to just call it a history of the ridiculous. But there's actually, much to my surprise, I just discovered this over the past year, there is we have a growing number of serious scholars who are now looking at the supernatural seriously in a metaphysical, an epistemological way, that the supernatural could be another dimension. And I think we have astrophysicists to thank for this, with the idea of the multiverse and so on and so forth. There is this opening, but when it comes to traditions, they're way, way back in the rearview mirror.
We have time for one more question. One more question.
Yes, I'm looking for a note of hope here. And I think we're sitting in the middle of it with the Buckley Society. You have 500 students who have signed up to support efforts to promote free speech, and you've got a petition that's working in that direction. So help me, Lauren. Is this not a sign of hope for this community?
I think it's absolutely a sign of hope, and I think having students like Kevin as our leaders, is absolutely a very important thing. I mean, Kevin, do you want to add anything about sort of hope that you see from your peers? I mean, most people wouldn't think that something like the Buckley program would have 500 student members.
So I'll talk about the way we got to 500. We just told students what the Buckley program was about, what we did, the program we offered, and students were interested in hearing new perspectives. They actually wanted to expose themselves sometimes to perspectives they didn't agree with and leave their comfort zone. And 500 is not a majority of the student body. We are not a majority of the student body yet. But I think it is encouraging to see that if I can just have a conversation with someone at the extracurricular bazaar and say, hey, we host debates, seminars, and dinners with people who are very prominent in politics, think tank world, academia, that they will be interested in joining. I think that's a very encouraging sign. And I think that with this sort of initiative with students who are willing to fight for Yale's future and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't just let our peers be canceled for whatever or whatnot, and we should stand up for them, that's probably the best base of support I could think of to show students that there are people behind them.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much to everyone for joining us, and please join me in thanking our speakers this morning.